Hello everybody and welcome to the Australian Institute of International Affairs. My name is Bryce Wakefield and I am the National Executive Director of the Institute. And we put this event together some 3 weeks, I think, or so ago, but obviously the situation in Ukraine has changed. I'm not going to introduce a blow-by-blow account of the Russian invasion. I think we're all up to speed with that already. But just to report some latest details that have been in the news. Overnight, the French President Emmanuel Macron has talked to Vladimir Putin and has said that he thinks that Putin is sticking to his war plans and that the war is likely to get worse. He has cautioned Putin, Macron has, that he thinks Putin is deluded. We have reports of a nuclear power plant in Ukraine, the largest of its kind in Europe, on fire after an attack by Russian troops. Russia's last independent TV station and top radio stations have been shut down. Ukraine says a second round of ceasefire talks with Russia has not yielded the results Kyiv hoped for, but the sides have discussed humanitarian corridors and agreed to speak again. Moldova has signed a formal application to join the European Union. And the US and Russia have opened a deconfliction hotline to ensure the two countries' pilots and warships don't mistakenly fire upon one another as they conduct daily missions in Eastern Europe. The situation is, of course, still grave. However, Vladimir Putin has said that the war is going to plan. Today, to discuss the events in his country, we have the Chargé d'Affaires of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Shalkivskiy. He holds degrees from Kyiv Shevchenko University, the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey in the US, and the Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine. He's had some 20 years of diplomatic experience and has been posted in Sweden and the US. And in discussion today, we also have Associate Professor Elizabeth Buchanan. She is a lecturer of strategic studies at the Australian War College. So I'll leave the introductions there because we want to get on as soon as possible to Q&A. And if you want to ask a question to the Chargé d'Affaires or Elizabeth, please do so, of course, by using the Q&A function in your Zoom portal. The upvote function is on, so if you see a question that you like, click on the thumbs up and the questions with the most thumbs will rise to the top. We're going to keep opening remarks short so that there will be plenty of time for Q&A. And so without further ado, I shall pass the floor over to Volodymyr.
Hello. My introduction will be short and formal. On the 24th of February, at 5 a.m., Russia committed an act of open aggression against Ukraine. We as a state has become a victim of armed aggression, and under Article 51 of the UN Charter informed the UN Security Council of our inherent right to individual or collective self-defense. The arguments adduced by the Russian president to justify the aggression are legally null and void and do constitute a crime in terms of universal values and in respect of the legally effective bilateral international treaties between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, as well as multilateral international treaties. The armed forces of the Russian Federation began intense shelling of the units of the armed forces of Ukraine in the east of our country, launched rockets and bombs at airfields telecommunication center, military facilities throughout Ukraine, including in the capital, Kyiv. The cities and towns of Ukraine along the state border and on the administrative line with occupied Crimea are under intensive shelling. Some of them are already occupied. We have already registered casualties, numerous casualties, among civilian population, including children. The lives of more than 40 million Ukrainian citizens living peacefully on their land are under the threat. 60,000 square kilometers of the European continent, governed by the principles of democracy, human rights, and peaceful development, could be ruined, and they are already ruined. Neither Ukraine, nor NATO, nor European Union is a threat to a peace in Europe. Today, nuclear Russia has the aim to destroy the state of Ukraine. But in fact, Russia pursues a broader goal: to stop the democratic development of the entire European continent, to undermine international law and order. Russia threatens freedom and democracy around the world. This is a universal threat. Therefore, the response to its actions must be universal. I will stop at this point, leaving more time and space for the Q&A and further comments.
All right, we're going to turn now to Elizabeth Buchanan. So Liz, could you give a reply or read your statement as well?
Thanks, Bryce. Great to be here. So I've cut my statement down to 5 minutes. First of all, I want to thank the team here at AIA National for hosting such great international security content over the past week or so. Anyone who's interested in kind of the origins and the outlook for this war, the recorded event a few days ago is really well worth watching. Before I share my kind of thoughts on the Australian policy when it comes to Ukraine, I really just want to take a moment to highlight the human cost of the situation. Obviously a humanitarian crisis for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, but this is also a crisis for Russia. I think we need to remember that the antagonist is the Kremlin and its current leadership, not the Russian people, who are largely devastated by what's going on here in Ukraine. So Kiev's attempted many times over the past 8 years to engage with Western leaders and draw Western assistance for what's going on. In response, we've applied sanctions, seeking to change Kremlin behaviour towards Ukraine. But I think we do need to start, questioning the efficacy of sanctions if they fail to shape or change state behaviour, or if they're used as a band-aid solution to simply signal a political position. We know now about a week ago that the Kremlin opted for a policy of full-scale invasion. So since then, Australia's Ukraine policy has really grown some teeth, and we've committed to $70 million of lethal aid for NATO to purchase ammunition and small missiles. We've also committed $35 million to non-lethal aid, so the humanitarian support here for the Ukrainian people. Australia is also broadening visa opportunities to Ukrainians wanting to leave the country. And we've also strengthened our sanctions on oligarchs and politicians. I think we're over 300 targeted people in the Russian parliament now. So Australia's current dual policy approach of sanctions on Russia and this mix of lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine, serves our interest in upholding the current rules-based order. I think an emerging challenge here, a week into this, is that the order that's emerging in our Indo-Pacific is shaping up to host a bit of a different one to that in Europe. So we need to start questioning, I think, some of the international institutions that we are seeing, in action here. And I'll draw attention to, the UN at the moment. So our neighbourhood here is populated by states who've refused to sign draft resolutions in the UN condemning Russian aggression. This included all of the ASEAN states, bar Singapore. And then in the UN Security Council, of course, we expected Russia to veto, but Indo-Pacific titans like China and India have consistently, abstained from calls to deplore Russian aggression. I think it's early days of the campaign. Ultimately, Russia maintains an upper hand in terms of military capability. I do think we should expect this to escalate. And I think right now we need to have a collective discussion about just where we can assist Ukraine beyond sanctions. I'll leave my points there actually and dig into the Q&A.
We do have a lot of people online, so if you want to get your question and get it in quick, I see that we have a number of esteemed scholars. We've got at least one former foreign minister, this is thanks very much for tuning in. I'll start with the question that I think Liz essentially just posed. And that is, what can ordinary Australian citizens do if they're concerned about the events in Ukraine?
We are grateful. I am thankful to all citizens of Australia who are sending messages of support. We have our telephone line at the embassy receiving at least 2-3 calls per minute. We are short on staff. There are only 2 of us. So some people calling just to express sympathy, honestly. Some proposing sending money to Ukraine and asking what kind of accounts can be used. Some are expressing desire to host Ukrainian families. We do not have refugees yet, but we do have probably tonight already and tomorrow, starting from tomorrow for sure, Ukrainians, citizens of Ukraine who will come to Australia with the visas that were issued in expedient manner. We don't have refugees or people from Ukraine with refugee status so far. It is still under consideration, under discussion. There are people who are calling and ready to fight for Ukraine. My response that we are really thankful to those people and taking into account that there was a statement by the Ukrainian president about forming the Foreign Legion, international brigades. Of course, we welcome those people to join. At the same time, I always stress that those people need to carefully explore Australian legislation because we don't want for them to get in trouble on their way back home. There are people also that are paramedics or truck drivers that would like to go and help with those delivery of the humanitarian assistance or helping in the hospitals, because we are already overwhelmed with civilians and military casualties in the hospitals. So this is very valuable. People are bringing flowers to our embassy. It's really touchy. In terms of government response, I'm also very thankful to the Australian government, to the Prime Minister Scott Morrison for the strong political statement, for the sanctions that were imposed in close collaboration with the US and the United Kingdom, and for the assistance that goes to our military and non-military and humanitarian through UN organizations and Red Cross. In this situation, we will be pleased if Australian government will continue such support further. We believe that there is a need for further expansion of sanctions.
Liz, just to mention to you, if you have a question, just wave your hand and I'll come to you. But in the meantime, I do have a question about the aid that Australia has provided, both lethal aid and humanitarian aid. Firstly, do you think that Australia has the mix right? Secondly, though, in terms of any aid, not just Australian aid, what is the capacity of Ukraine to absorb it? There are significant questions around whether a country in the state that Ukraine is in can actually bring the arms and the humanitarian aid and put it to good use with cities surrounded by Russian troops, lines of logistics down. Are you hearing anything from your home country about this? What's the situation on the ground?
Of course, the situation is difficult, but this kind of assistance is moving effective along the planned lines. First of all, because we rely on international partners like UN, like Red Cross, that are quite effective and have relevant experience. Second, NATO is also quite effective. But of course, their responsibility ends at our border between Poland and Ukraine. And actually, Poland serves as a gateway to Ukraine right now. And for all type of assistance, we also have borders with Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, but Poland plays a crucial role at this moment. And the assistance is already moving inside the country because we know how to deliver those goods, those humanitarian aid and military supply to our positions. Just recently, new javelins, anti-tank weapons, was received in Kyiv, in capital. So entire situation in western part of the country, that is kind of size of almost like Tasmania, is under complete control of Ukrainian forces. So there is plenty of space to receive aid and to further distribute it.
Okay. Liz, can I just ask one quick one, Liz? I'll just go back to the first part of my question. There is a similar question here from John Hallam, and it says, well, it's a statement really, maybe the Australian government should up the ante in lethal aid rather than non-lethal aid. Is there a particular type of aid that is more important at the moment that Ukraine needs from partner countries?
I can mention that actually on yesterday, I believe, or yesterday night, the first, I think it's first Royal Air Force, Australian Royal Air Force aircraft C-17 Globemaster left from Australia for Europe. With the supply of non-military equipment like telecommunication, body armor, surveillance, medical supply. And this is a really important sign of solidarity, something that is delivered specifically from Australia. But this is only part, of course, because all other assistance will be channeled through the Australian partners like US, UK, and NATO in terms of lethal or military equipment. So it's good that there is a coordination center that knows how to avoid duplicity. It means that well, there is clear understanding that a good communication line between Kyiv, capital of Ukraine, and NATO in terms of what exactly is needed. in the situation like this when Australia is sending funding to NATO, and NATO has specific requests from our military what exactly they needed. They can very effectively and fast find it in Europe and supply to Ukraine.
Good, Liz.
Yeah, they're really good questions. I think it kind of draws upon this kind of complex problem that we have, which is the West in its kind of dual-pronged approach with the sanctions and the lethal and the non-lethal aid, is still quite a bit of virtue signaling. I mean, in no uncertain terms, we've had Biden indicate that US troops will not set foot in Ukraine, and that NATO has reiterated a few times now that its military commitment is resigned to NATO territory only. But I think there's a component to this narrative which we are forgetting, and that's the West is making a choice as well, not to put boots on the ground, not to escalate the crisis.
There were no formal and informal requests from the government of Ukraine to anyone outside to bring boots on the grounds. It is our country. We will defend it by ourselves. We have no illusion about receiving divisions of American or German or British troops into our territory. What we need is the assistance with military, with the non-military and humanitarian. We have strong military. It's 250,000 force. We have strong territorial defense force, which is compiled by the mostly citizens of Ukraine who has a real combat experience, because we have 8 years of history of armed conflict in the East. So it's up to 400,000 males with a real combat experience inside the country. So they are not in the military, they are already retired. But it is already around 100,000 force of territorial defense plus to our military. We have significant flow of Ukrainian patriots from around the world. I should mention that our diaspora is very significant. Here in Australia, it's relatively small. I would say it's 40,000 people, comparing to Canada, where we have 2 million, and US 1.5 million. So according to the rough estimates, it's already more than 50,000 patriots of Ukraine who live abroad that already get into the country in order to join defense and fight for our freedom. And again, not everyone who goes to Ukraine is going to take weapon in his or her arms. There are, of course, a lot of work in hospitals, in cargo distribution centers, in supplying those military and non-military aid to the relevant positions. The logistics is really important. It's one of the crucial elements. So we do need people, and we have those people.
Great. All right, we have a question here from Clarence Nabawirz. I'm sorry, I will have mispronounced your name. He asks, from the Ukrainian perspective, do you believe that the West can do anything more beyond economic sanctions, humanitarian, technological, and logistical assistance to curtail President Putin and the Russian military that is short of direct military confrontation?
Of course. When it's really difficult to remain for me in diplomatic lines when I have my parents in Kyiv in bomb shelters every night. So of course, we would like this pressure to be as much as possible on Russia. Of course, we would like to have assistance as much as possible from international community, because we are fighting not only for Ukraine, but for all freedoms and rights of liberal democracies around the world. And if we fail, but I'm sure we will not give up, then someone will be next. But we have no illusion again. We were warned, we were prepared for this kind of scenario, but of course we were shocked when it started at 5 a.m. in the morning, when the people were actually sleeping and the bombs started to explode. But it's simple as it is: keep sanctions further, expand them, and provide assistance to Ukraine as much as you can. At the same time, again, no illusions. Nobody is going to fight Mr. Putin in Russia. This is the responsibility of Russian citizens. And it's important to deliver the message to the Russian citizens, because the propaganda machine works very well. I personally, from time to time, watch Russian TV just to get perception of what's going on in the media and read Russian media outlets, newspapers on the internet. So the level of determination to destroy Ukraine is really strong. Of course, they're surprised with the level of our resistance. I believe everyone's surprised in the world with the level of our resistance. But there is no kind of considerations about whether Russia did a mistake. No, they're confident that they are doing the right thing, that they are liberating Ukraine from Nazis. And it's especially cynical, taking into account that our president is from Jewish family and with the pro-Russian, from the pro-Russian region. So we do our best in order to defend ourselves. But as a former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, who was born in Kyiv, said in, I believe, in 1950s or 1960s about the clashes with between Israelis and their neighbors, that they referred to her neighbors that they want us to die, we want to leave. It leaves little room for negotiation and for finding compromise, but we have to find this compromise eventually.
Oh yeah, Liz, sorry.
Yeah, I just might jump in there on this kind of call for the Russian people to take some agency here. Absolutely. I just wonder, you know, how do we get that in motion? I mean, there's a couple of assumptions here that are really curtailing any popular movements in Russia. I mean, the first one is, you know, we assume that the will and the interest of the Russian people is to collectively organize and push back and stand out in the streets. We've seen in this last week, you know, 2 new laws come into power. Anyone that is found in protest marching is shipped off to the front line in Ukraine. Another one I had heard was if you're tweeting or if you're on social media and you refer to this war as a war instead of a conflict, you know, it's 15 years jail time. So there's that component there. And the second component is, you know, what structures exist within the Kremlin that haven't been dismantled in the last 20 years by Putin to actually, you know, see leadership change to facilitate that. So there's all sorts of, you know, domestic challenges on the Russian view as well.
I support this vision. The only message that we can deliver, since Russia effectively cut off any communication lines with Kyiv, already a couple of years ago, and right now we have started just recently had a second round of so-called peaceful talks, but I doubt that it's possible to have peaceful talks when there is intensification of shelling of civilian districts in Ukraine. What we do, we take Russian soldiers that some of them are actually giving up by themselves when they see Ukrainian soldiers. Some of them actually really captured during fighting, providing them with a telephone and ask them to call their father and mother and explain them what's going on, because those relatives still believe that they're taking part in the military exercise somewhere in Caucasus or Crimea or in Belarus. And then we propose them to father and mother of that specific officer or soldier, please come to Ukraine and pick up your son. We don't want him to be here, but we need formal statement, at least on your behalf, that you are not going to allow him to come back again with weapons. There is no illusion about Kremlin. Of course, Mr. Putin effectively eliminated any kind of independent thinking around him. Any kind of opposition leaders, even Mr. Navalny, has very slim chances to, it's my personal opinion, to win the elections in democratic Russia in case Putin is in power. I mean, even if he has a relatively low number of support, I mean, Mr. Navalny. So it means that even elimination of Mr. Putin still does not solve the issue completely, because Kremlin is quite, well, it is very under control of Mr. Putin, but Kremlin is very united in terms of their position, their foreign policy priorities, and so on and so on. It is challenging, especially with such level of control on media. And I personally extend big credit to those Russian citizens who go to the streets, because it's easy to support Ukraine in Australia, but it's very different story when you are trying to raise Ukrainian flag in Moscow, in St. Petersburg. So you have to be very brave man or woman to do this. And I acknowledge this. But nobody is going to go to Russia and change situation, except Russian citizens.
Right, we have a few questions about a potential end game and what that might look like. I'm not sure how well equipped any of us are to answer that, but there's a question here from Margaret Valentine, who, after expressing her sorrow for the government and people of Ukraine, asks, would the Ukrainian leaders who have shown incredible leadership in this crisis consider a status of neutrality as a brokerage point when negotiating with Russia?
We would like to stop the war. We wish to stop the shelling of our cities and towns. We are ready to negotiate. There are certain points that we can agree, but there are certain points that we cannot agree, and it's not about Ukrainian government. There are too many casualties among civilians. There are too many destructions already. There are already at least 16 children, innocent children, that were killed during those fighting and shelling on our side. It will be extremely difficult for Ukrainian government to make any kind of concessions or compromises when there is such powerful movement among Ukrainian people. My parents, 72 and 70 years old, they had possibility to move out of the country. Of course, I proposed them, but it was their decision to stay in Kyiv and help our military with making sandwiches and deliver water. And they are not alone. There are a lot of people who stays in those cities and towns and do whatever they can. I'm not talking about 100%, but there is considerable amount of civilians who support in any possible way they can this resistance, and it will continue. And neutrality, I have to remind that in 1994, Ukraine inherited third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And we signed so-called Budapest Memorandum. It was not ratified by the parliaments, so it had no kind of commitments. There were kind of informal, but it was signed by the leaders of the Russia, United Kingdom, and the US, that Ukraine is giving up its nuclear to Russia, and those countries make concessions regarding the take commitments to respect our sovereignty and territorial integrity. After all those events, after Crimea annexation, Donbass, and now full-scale war, who will provide us guarantees that this status of neutrality that we can commit will be honored by Russia? And if Russia fails to honor this agreement again, who will step in to help us? This is a big question for discussion. I am not authorized. I don't have any instructions from my government to make conclusions. I just raised the question about complexity of this issue. We would like for the war to stop, but not at any price. We are not going to give up our statehood, our democracy, our desire to be part of the European family, and join European Union. Our neutrality status, the biggest tragedy for Mr. Putin is that Ukraine was neutral. It was written in our constitution in 1991 when we became independent. We were neutral. We were out of any military blocks. This is Mr. Putin who pushed us to search for any kind of security alliance that can help us be independent, because we saw that aggressive development of aggressive military and foreign policy in Russia. So we changed our constitution in actually not far away, not far ago. It was in 2019 when we stated, fixed in our constitution that our ultimate goal is to join the European Union and NATO. So in case Ukrainian government would like to change this, it requires at least 2/3 of the parliament to vote for this, to make changes in the constitution, and it will be required significant effort in order to persuade local population, because more than 50% of population supports idea of joining EU and NATO. And it is not very flexible decision to make. Though everyone understands that right now we are under severe attack and our existence under threat.
Okay, Liz, I think you have a statement or question.
Yeah, I might just jump in there. Respectfully, you know, what's going on in Ukraine is horrific, but it is a tinderbox for broader international challenges when it comes to forcing neutrality via force. I mean, these are plenty of lessons that can be picked up and used by states like China.
It's a complex issue and complex world. There are many powerful countries like China, India, other countries that have their own specific position under this question. And of course, situation in Ukraine, development of the situation in Ukraine will affect many unstable regions in the world. Governments around the world will make conclusions about how things can be developed or how things can end up in case of such grim developments. I do not have expertise to comment on China or India. Of course, we have to take into account their positions. For India, Ukraine is a powerful educational hub. We had 20,000 Indian students at the eve of aggression. Some of them are still in Kharkiv that are under heavy bombardment. One Indian student was already killed during that shelling. There was negotiation between Prime Minister of India and Mr. Putin about humanitarian corridors. And right now, the humanitarian corridor issue was the primary issue at the second round of peaceful talks on the border between Ukraine and Belarus. It's a very complex picture.
Liz, you had something else there? I
Yeah, I just wanted to delve a little bit more into that kind of the relationship between Ukraine, this kind of trinity, Ukraine, Russia and China. So if I'm not mistaken, China is your largest trade partner.
Exactly.
Has Ukraine considered, policies of, using the China-Russia relationship, going through back channels with China to, force more of a policy change in Russia? Has that been tabled yet?
I don't know that this is an honest answer, but I would doubt any kind of prospects of such developments. You can just use example of Australia and China relations, how complex they are. The same situation, China is the biggest trading partner, but how effective is to deliver political messages and carry on political dialogue. Of course, we do not have such complexity with China as Australia has, but we are quite different with China in terms of our political structure and our political processes that going on. But China is important country, important partner that we have to take into account. Their position needs to be taken into account. But so far, there is, as for me, little involvement from the Chinese side. They try to remain as neutral as possible under these developments so far. They call for the ceasefire and for the peaceful talks, and they also confirm that they respect our sovereignty and independence. But this is so far. We also respect sovereignty and independence of all countries in the world, but it doesn't mean that we are going to do something, pretty much.
Good. Okay. I have a lot of questions here about the complexities of NATO expansion, and I think I'm going to turn this one over to Liz rather than Volodymyr for a first shot. And actually asked Liz a direct question. It's Dragica Damjanovic, and the question is, as an expert on Russian geopolitics and strategy, do you think that Russia has any legitimate grievances with respect to NATO expansion?
Yeah, really good question. And before this latest kind of iteration in the conflict occurred, that was kind of the headline debate we were having over Russia-Ukraine. Not that it would help either way, an answer right now. You know, realities on the ground, you know, don't really mind much for history. I think it's important to point out that Ukraine was not close at all to NATO membership. You know, that wasn't on the horizon in the immediate future. And I think that argument, while there's the historical kind of issue there for Russia, if you just look at a map, you can see, you know, it is a country that has been for centuries, you know, under siege and will continue to be. That's just the nature of its geography. Yeah, I think that there could have been any number of reasons used as a sort of reason to do what Putin is doing right now in Ukraine. And that's just one of them.
I would continue probably with the following statement. So this is not about NATO and the attack and aggression against Ukraine. It's about restoring former glory of Soviet Union and Russian Empire. Well, it's what was kind of well known that for Mr. Putin himself, the biggest tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. That this is what he's dreaming about, to be as powerful as Soviet Union, to restore the control over the territories that were lost. And Ukraine, into his mind, is imminent part of these territories. 40+ million people, territory almost like New South Wales, with the rich natural resources, top 5 agricultural producer in the world, country that produces missile launchers, space launchers, aircraft, engines. So it's a lot to fight for, but he does not understand that you can win the war with the army, but you cannot win the war with people. If well, of course, Russia outnumbers Ukrainian military in many times, but with such support from ordinary people, we will keep fighting for long, believe me. And you can shell the civilian and districts and peaceful cities and towns, but the dossier that we are already preparing for the International Criminal Court is growing. And someone someday will be held accountable for this. Also miscalculation in terms of positioning of attacks. It's historically known that when you look at the Ukrainian map, of course, for obvious reasons, as territory, as you kind of look to the eastern part of Ukraine, there is a bigger part of ethnic Russians, Russian-speaking population, Russian Orthodox Church. This is eastern part, neighboring Russia. And this is the part where the biggest fighting right now taking place. We have numerous statements from the ordinary people, the citizens of Ukraine of Russian origin, who just sending so powerful message to Putin that thank you, Mr. Putin, for bringing Russia to our help. You destroyed everything that we had. You killed our relatives and friends. I am ethnic Russian, as some statements goes, and I had big sympathy towards Russia before, not anymore. As my father tells me, 2 nights spending in the bomb shelter changes the mindset of any supporter of Russian world completely. What will happen next? Well, it's not about NATO for Ukraine. It's about survival. So this is our country. We have no choice. We have to defend it. I personally would love to go back, but I believe that the job I'm doing here, and we are only two of us in the embassy, is important to deliver those messages on behalf of the government of Ukraine. But my cousins, they are actually in the front line with weapons in their hands. There are no indications that we are going to give up. Yes, they can destroy us, maybe completely. Yes, there is a humanitarian catastrophe that is started in some areas. But that was the choice of the adult population to stay and to support military or to fight. There was significant outflow of population. I would say, it's my rough estimate, maybe 20–25% of the population of major cities in the east, and including Kyiv, who have left for western part of Ukraine that is quite peaceful right now. And it's approximately, according to the UN, it's already around 1 million refugees from Ukraine in Poland. We are 40+ million country. NATO is just one puzzle of the story, of the picture. It's not the explanation and it's not justification. We, of course, believe that 21st century is not the time when one country can just overstep all international norms and principles and commitments under international treaties and do whatever their leaders think and go from it without any accountability. Thank you.
Of course, I mean, you've just mentioned Russia can destroy you, which is not a attractive prospect. What Putin is clearly aiming for is to remove the Zelensky government and governments like it. And I've even heard speculation that he might be aiming to put Viktor Yanukovych back in power, the president who was deposed during the Maidan protests in 2014. You laid out quite the case for a civic nationalism or civic patriotism in Ukraine, and I think that's been on display throughout this conflict. Do you think there's ever a scenario where the Ukrainian people would accept the type of political, the type of government that Putin would favor?
People will not accept, and Ukraine is just too big country for. We are not Chechnya or even Georgia in 2008 is a number of times smaller. It's not. It's for Mr. Putin. It was easy to get in, but there is no easy way to get out. There are no good scenarios for him anymore. And his initial plan was to, to come with a short, victorious operation of installment of pro-Russian government in Kyiv topping the current democratically elected government, though he thinks that it is kind of anti-Russian Western funded government. But this attempt failed clearly. Ukraine is just too big, first of all, and second, the resistance is just too significant for Russia, for Kremlin. Yes, they had very big resources, human resources, but again, coming back to the Russian TV, do you know that they are already openly discussing on Russian TV issue of inviting freeing prisoners and enrolling them into the Russian army because they have shortage. It's quite a surprise. They have shortage of reservists to send them to fight in Ukraine. And the scenario about coming to Kyiv with paratroopers, capturing one of the nearby airfield by special ops, then the number of transport military aircraft bringing the paratroopers. Those paratroopers enter Kyiv, destroy the government districts, bring in the pro-Russian Lukashenko type government, and installing this. This was initial, of course, idea. Putin didn't want to destroy Ukraine. Putin didn't want to occupy Ukraine. He needed just Belarusian type country, because the idea was not to kind of punish Ukraine, but to have Ukraine work for the glory of Russian Empire, future Russian Empire that he is kind of dreaming about. And what we see now is already second, third, and fourth scenarios that are kind of they are bringing on the table because they failed with the first scenario. They are not able to destroy Kyiv, to enter Kyiv successfully, destroy the government, take out the government. So then the question of why they started to so heavily bombard Kharkiv. It's the second major city in the east, second major city in the country. It's 1.5 million people. It's very close to the Russian border. It's like 80 kilometers from the Russian border in the east. Well, because they thought that if they fail with Kyiv, okay, they can then repeat situation with Kharkiv that took place 100 years ago. When the Russian Bolsheviks took power, they moved to Ukraine. There were a number of attacks, but they were not quite successful in capturing Kyiv. And there was resistance in Kyiv. So they decided to establish capital in Kharkiv for Ukraine. And Kharkiv actually was capital of Ukraine for at least 5 or 7 years in 1920s. So they thought that it might be the situation to just divide Ukraine along some lines, along, for example, Dnieper River, east and west, have capital, new capital in Kharkiv, pro-Russian government installed, and then we'll see further how to deal with the rest of the country of Ukraine. But again, they failed so far. Kharkiv defenders fight fiercely, and they fight back. So we now witness third scenario. They captured Kherson. It's a regional district in the south, which is very close to the Crimea. When the attacks started, Ukraine is quite a big country. We did not have significant military resources to cover all areas. So the area from Crimea was not defended. We did not have significant amount of troops at that stage, at that area. So Russians were able to move in and to capture significant areas. And now they are kind of controlling territory around Kherson. So what our kind of intelligence said that they are planning demonstration for tomorrow, bringing pro-Russian supporters from Crimea and asking Russian government to consider recognition of independent Kherson People's Republic, the same pattern as the Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic that were recognized by Russia just on the eve of attack. So we have quite new story, like they would like to now digest Ukraine by small parts, establishing small, we have 24 oblasts, 24 regions in our country. Kherson is one of them. So declaring Kherson People's Republic with fake demonstration, fake referendum, and recognition of by the Russian government creates totally new perspective that, okay, for the international community, Russian government will just declare that those are just Ukrainian people who ask Russian government for support for recognition of their rights, and we cannot stay aside like it happened with the Donetsk and Lugansk. And taking into account background of Mr. Putin, I believe there will be multiple scenarios. So the war continues.
Right. Well, we are almost out of time. Liz, I know you had one further question, so I'll let you ask it. Or one further statement.
Yeah, one further statement just to wrap us out. I think when it comes to, Western goals in this crisis, we've got this approach of, applying sanctions and providing lethal and non-lethal aid to really damage Russia is the goal there. And then the second approach is, the West is wanting to avoid escalation with Russia directly or miscalculation. And I guess the point is the humanitarian face of this, the human cost of this crisis, as an interest is really falling further down the list of priorities. And unfortunately, I think the cost will be Ukraine as we know it if we continue to just approach the issue with sanctions.
For us, it's a matter of survival. So we ask for the expansion of sanctions, for the further push for the boycott of Russian vodka, Russian goods, stopping entry of any kind of Russian ships or Russian aircrafts to the territory of our partners, breaking diplomatic relations, expelling Russian diplomats, and so on and so on, as much as hard as possible, because it's a matter of life and death for us. But of course, it's up to the Western governments to decide what is appropriate and what is not. But we will push to the maximum possible scope of sanctions and assistance, simply because this is a matter of life and death for us. And there are no kind of intention from our side to give up at this point, at least.
Right, well, we have gone over time now, so we'll call this session to an end. I want to thank my guests today, Dr. Elizabeth Buchanan, of course, and of course, Volodymyr Shalkivskiy, the Chargé d'Affaires of Ukraine. I know it must be an incredibly busy time for you at the moment. I know the thoughts of a lot of the Australian population go out to you and your countrymen and those affected in the conflict in your country. It really is a sad situation, but we are very grateful that you have taken the time to come and talk to us today. For those of you who want to see a repeat of this session, we will be uploading it as soon as we can to our YouTube channel. That's AIIA Vision. You should be able to find it there. And please do keep an eye on our webpage. Obviously, there's a lot more to this conflict. We will be covering it either in Australian Outlook, our online publication, or in events like this one. Again, I want to thank the Chargé d'Affaires, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you.